For years, people have debated whether Deion Sanders would ever make the jump to the NFL. Fans argue about it every offseason. Media personalities throw out wild predictions. But this time, the conversation didn't come from speculation or hot takes. It came straight from someone inside Deion's inner circle, and what he said instantly changed the tone of the debate. Former NFL veteran Adam Pacman Jones went viral after casually dropping a statement that felt less like an opinion and more like a warning. According to him, Deion isn't chasing just any NFL job. He's not interested in prestige, legacy points, or proving himself at the next level. There's only one scenario where he would even consider coaching in the league, and if that situation doesn't exist, the answer is simply no. That alone raised eyebrows, but then came the part that really set social media on fire. Pacman suggested that Deion would never coach against his own son. Instead, if Deion ever puts on an NFL headset, it would be because he's coaching with him. That single comment instantly connected Deion's future to one franchise that's already drowning in rumors, the Cleveland Browns. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a Hall of Famer testing himself at the next level. It became a much bigger conversation about power, control, and how far a coach is willing to go to protect his family. Some fans called it legendary, others said it would be chaos from day one. And right in the middle of it all is Shedeur Sanders, whose NFL future now seems tangled in decisions far bigger than football. And here's the part nobody seems ready to answer: is this about legacy, or is it about leverage? Because once you hear the full story behind this claim, it becomes clear that Deion's next move might shock a lot more people than anyone expected. When Adam Pacman Jones speaks on Deion Sanders, people listen not because he's chasing headlines, but because of how close he actually is to the situation. Pacman isn't an outsider reacting to rumors on social media. He's a former 12-year NFL veteran who spent real time around Deion Sanders, both on and off the field. Their relationship goes back years, built on trust, shared experiences, and constant communication. That's what made his recent comments hit differently. This wasn't some rehearsed media take or dramatic prediction meant to stir clicks. It was casual, almost too casual. Pacman spoke like someone letting something slip that wasn't supposed to sound controversial, and that's exactly why it went viral. When he said Deion would only consider coaching in the NFL under very specific conditions, it didn't feel hypothetical. It felt personal, like he was speaking from knowledge, not guesswork. What really caught people's attention wasn't just what he said, but how confidently he said it. Pacman didn't hesitate. He didn't frame it as a rumor or say, maybe. He spoke as if the decision had already been made behind closed doors. That confidence instantly separated his words from the usual off-season noise fans hear every year. There's also history here that adds weight to his voice. Pacman has publicly supported the Sanders family during tense moments, including being involved behind the scenes when serious issues surfaced around Shedeur Sanders. That kind of involvement doesn't happen unless there's genuine trust. So when Pacman talks about Deion's mindset, many believe he's echoing conversations that never made it to the public. And timing matters. The NFL coaching carousel is always spinning. Teams like the Cleveland Browns are constantly surrounded by rumors, speculation, and pressure to make bold moves. So when Pacman's comments landed right in the middle of that chaos, they didn't feel random, they felt strategic, whether intentional or not. That's why his words mattered. Not because they confirmed anything officially, but because they reopened a door many thought was still locked. And once that door cracked open, fans started asking a much bigger question: if this is really how Deion thinks, what does that mean for everyone involved? And that's where the story starts to get even more complicated. What stopped people mid-scroll wasn't just the idea of Deion Sanders coaching in the NFL, it was the claim that there may be only one team he would even consider saying yes to. According to Adam Pacman Jones, Deion isn't shopping his resume around the league. He's not waiting on interviews or hopping for the right opportunity. If he ever leaves college football, the destination is already clear in his mind. Pacman pointed straight to the Cleveland Browns, and that's where the conversation instantly changed. This wasn't about market size, salary, or prestige. The reason was far more personal. Pacman suggested Deion would never put himself in a position where he's coaching against his own son. Instead, if Deion steps into an NFL locker room, it would be because he's coaching with him. That single detail flipped the narrative. Suddenly, this wasn't a normal coaching rumor. It became a family-centered power move that almost never happens at the professional level. Deion has always been vocal about protecting his players, but especially his sons. Reports in past interviews suggest he's deeply intentional about where and how they're developed. So the idea that he'd only accept an NFL job tied directly to Shedeur Sanders didn't sound impossible. It sounded on brand. The Browns, whether intentionally or not, fit perfectly into that speculation. The franchise has lived in a constant state of uncertainty, especially at quarterback. That instability fuels non-stop off-season rumors, making them an easy target for high-profile hypotheticals. Fans already debate bold, unconventional moves, and bringing in Deion Sanders would be exactly that. Still, it's important to be clear, there's no confirmed offer, no official talks, and no evidence the Browns are actively pursuing this scenario. This remains speculation, driven by Pacman's comments and amplified by fans connecting the dots. But what makes it stick is how logical it sounds when you zoom out. Deion doesn't need the NFL. The NFL would need him, and only on terms he controls. And that's the real twist. This isn't about whether Cleveland wants Deion. It's about whether Deion would ever put himself in a situation where he doesn't have full leverage. According to Pacman, that answer is already decided, and it only leads to one place. But even that raises another question. Why would Deion leave at all when he hasn't finished what he started? For all the NFL noise swirling around him, Deion Sanders hasn't acted like someone eager to leave where he is. In fact, if you look closely at how he talks about his current situation, it feels more like unfinished business than a stepping stone. Deion didn't come to college football just to pass through. He came to build something, and walking away too early would go against everything he said since day one. At Colorado Buffaloes, Deion inherited a program most people had already written off. He flipped the roster, flipped the culture, and instantly put Colorado back in national conversations. One season brought massive attention and unexpected wins. The next came with setbacks, criticism, and growing pains that reminded everyone how brutal rebuilding can be, and that contrast matters. People close to the situation often point out that Deion isn't satisfied with just starting a turnaround. He wants proof of sustainability, proof that the system works beyond headlines and hype. Leaving now, especially after a down year, would open the door for critics to say the experiment failed, and that's not a narrative Deion has ever been comfortable accepting. There's also the control factor. In college football, Deion has influence over recruiting, development, messaging, and culture. He can shape the program in his image. The NFL doesn't work that way. Power is divided. Front offices make decisions. Owners get involved. And patience is thin. For someone as hands-on and outspoken as Deion, that loss of control isn't a small detail. It's a deal breaker unless the situation is perfect. Then there's the personal side. Deion has repeatedly emphasized loyalty to players who bought into his vision. Walking away mid-build would mean leaving behind athletes who trusted him to see the process through. That's not something he's taken lightly in the past, and it's another reason the NFL talk feels premature. So while fans debate destinations and hypotheticals, the reality is simpler. Deion doesn't look like a coach searching for an exit. He looks like someone focused on finishing a job, proving that the rebuild wasn't just loud but lasting. And that's what makes the NFL speculation so complicated. If Deion isn't done in Colorado yet, then any move to the league would have to be more than tempting. It would have to be unavoidable. The moment people realized this scenario involved a father potentially coaching his own son, the conversation shifted completely. This stopped being just another coaching rumor and turned into a debate about legacy, optics, and risk. Because if Deion Sanders ever did coach in the NFL alongside Shedeur Sanders, it wouldn't just be historic, it would be controversial from day one. On one side, supporters see it as something never done at this level. A Hall of Fame player turned head coach guiding his son through the most competitive league in the world. To them, it feels poetic. Deion has always preached preparation, discipline, and mental toughness. Coaching his own son at the highest level could be seen as the ultimate extension of that philosophy, a full-circle moment built on trust that already exists. But critics see a completely different picture. The NFL isn't college football. Locker rooms are filled with grown men fighting for contracts, playing time, and careers that can disappear overnight. In that environment, perception matters almost as much as reality. Even if Deion treated Shedeur exactly like every other player, the assumption of favoritism would follow them everywhere. Every missed throw, every late-game decision, every snap Shedeur took would be magnified and questioned. There's also the pressure factor. Playing quarterback in the NFL is already brutal. Doing it while being coached by your father, one of the most famous personalities the sport has ever seen, would turn every game into a headline. Every mistake wouldn't just belong to Shedeur. It would reflect on Deion, the staff, and the organization as a whole. History doesn't offer many comparisons. There have been rare moments where fathers coached sons in professional sports, but never quite like this, and never with this level of media attention. Deion's personality alone guarantees non-stop scrutiny. Add family dynamics and the margin for error becomes razor thin. And yet, that's what makes the idea so fascinating. Deion has never avoided pressure. He's thrived in it. He's built his entire coaching image on doing things his way, regardless of criticism. If anyone would even consider pulling off something this unconventional, it would be him. The real question isn't whether it could work. It's whether the reward, rewriting NFL history, would be worth the chaos that would come with it. While most of the conversation centers on quarterbacks and head coaches, there's another name quietly hovering over this entire situation: Shedeur Sanders. And according to fans and online speculation, his role could be just as important as anyone realizes. Shedeur has always occupied a different lane than his brother. He isn't framed as the face of a franchise or the centerpiece of an offense. Instead, his game has been built on physicality, energy, and edge, the kind of presence that doesn't always show up in box scores, but changes the tone of a defense. Supporters argue that his style fits the NFL mindset more naturally than people admit. Critics, however, question whether he's done enough to lock down a long-term future at the next level. That uncertainty is exactly why his name keeps popping up in these discussions. Some fans believe that if Deion Sanders were ever to make an NFL move, it wouldn't be just about one son. Rumors suggest Deion would want both of them in position to succeed, not necessarily handed opportunities, but placed in environments where development and trust already exist. In that context, Shedeur becomes a wildcard rather than an afterthought. It's also important to understand how Deion views family within football. He's never treated his sons as separate from the process. From Jackson State to Colorado, he's emphasized accountability publicly, even when it made things uncomfortable. That history fuels speculation that if Deion ever accepted an NFL role, it would come with long-term vision, not a short cameo or headline-grabbing moment. Still, this part of the conversation remains firmly in rumor territory. There's no confirmation that Shedeur is tied to any NFL plans, no reports of teams aligning strategies around him, and no official signals that such a move is even being considered. What keeps the speculation alive is timing. Careers in football don't move in straight lines, and opportunities can open suddenly, especially when a high-profile name is involved. For some fans, the idea of both Sanders brothers being part of the same NFL chapter feels inevitable. For others, it feels unrealistic and forced. But whether it ever happens or not, Shedeur's presence adds another layer of complexity to an already unusual scenario. Because if this story were only about one quarterback, it would be simple. The moment it becomes about family, it turns into something much bigger and much harder to ignore. At this point, it's important to slow the story down just enough to separate what's being said from what's actually happening. Because despite how loud the conversation has become, there is still a massive gap between rumor and reality, and that gap matters. Right now, there are no confirmed talks, no leaked negotiations, and no credible reports indicating that Deion Sanders is actively pursuing an NFL head coaching job. There's also no evidence that the Cleveland Browns or any NFL franchise has formally approached him. Everything fueling this conversation traces back to comments, speculation, and people connecting dots that feel logical, not deals that are actually in motion. That's how off-season narratives are born. Every year, teams with uncertainty attract big names. The Browns sit right in that category. Quarterback questions, coaching pressure, and constant media attention make them an easy target for hypothetical scenarios. Add Deion's star power to that mix and the rumor grows legs on its own. It doesn't need confirmation to spread, it just needs imagination. Social media amplifies this effect. One viral clip becomes dozens of reaction videos. A speculative comment turns into a trending topic. Soon, people are debating outcomes that don't even exist yet. That doesn't mean the conversation is meaningless, but it does mean it's being driven more by fascination than fact. There's also Deion's silence to consider. When rumors gain real traction, coaches usually push back or clarify. Deion hasn't done either. Some fans interpret that silence as strategic. Others see it as proof there's nothing to address. Both interpretations are guesses, and that's the key point. Everything about this situation is being interpreted, not confirmed. What keeps the rumor alive isn't evidence, it's personality. Deion has always operated outside traditional expectations. He's made unconventional moves before, so people assume he'll do it again. That reputation turns every hypothetical into something that feels possible, even when there's no paper trail. So where does that leave things? Right now, this story exists in the space between curiosity and chaos. It's fueled by comments, timing, and imagination, not contracts or press releases. And until something real happens, that's exactly where it stays. But sometimes, the most revealing part of a rumor is whether it's true. It's why so many people want it to be. When you step back from the rumors, the hypotheticals, and the viral clips, this story stops being about one NFL job. It becomes a window into how Deion Sanders actually moves and why he's never followed a traditional path. Deion has never chased approval. As a player, he bent the rules of what was considered normal. As a coach, he's done the same thing. From Jackson State to Colorado, every move has been calculated around control, timing, and leverage. That's why the idea of him jumping to the NFL just to see if he can do it doesn't really add up. If Deion ever takes that step, it won't be about proving himself to the league. It will be about shaping the situation entirely on his terms. That's what Adam Pacman Jones' comments really exposed. Not a secret deal, not an inside scoop, but a mindset. A reminder that Deion doesn't move unless the move benefits more than just his resume. Family matters, legacy matters, and just as importantly, how the story ends matters. Some fans see that as confidence, others see it as control. Critics argue that tying coaching decisions to family could complicate everything. Supporters counter that Deion has earned the right to do things differently. Both sides might be right, and that tension is exactly why this conversation refuses to die. The NFL, for all its structure and tradition, is built on results. Deion's brand is built on influence. If those two worlds ever collide, it would create a situation the league rarely deals with. A coach who doesn't need the job, doesn't need validation, and isn't afraid to walk away if the conditions aren't perfect. And that's the part that keeps people guessing. Maybe Deion never coaches in the NFL. Maybe this was always just noise amplified by off-season boredom. Or maybe, years from now, this moment gets replayed as the first real clue that the story was already being written long before anyone noticed. Because with Deion Sanders, the biggest surprise is never what he does. It's when he decides the moment is finally right.